Hello, my friends. What does it mean when an American celebrity comes up to Toronto and does a newscast from the street and someone shouts at him, F the Jews, and the people around him just laugh? Has Canada changed? I think maybe it has. We'll talk a little bit about that. Plus, a great conversation with my friend Mark Morano about what Mark Carney calls decarbonized oil. Yeah, it's like dehydrated water. We'll try and figure it out what that means. Anyway, that's today's show. Let me invite you to get a subscription of what we call Rebel News Plus. It's the video version of this podcast. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com, click subscribe. It's $8 a month. You get all the video side of things, and you support Rebel News, which we really need because unlike pretty much every other media in this country, the mainstream guys, the regime media guys, we don't get government funding, and it shows. So it helps us when you go to rebelnewsplus.com. Hey, one more thing.
Feel like Ottawa's got its boot on Alberta's neck? Well, it's time to push back. Join us for Rebel News Live, Saturday, June 14th at the Red Deer Curling Center. Spend the day with Ezra Levant, me, Sheila Gunn Reid, and a powerhouse lineup of freedom fighters, political thinkers, and grassroots leaders. We're talking energy, free speech, and especially independence, and how the West can finally stop getting screwed. This isn't just a conference, it's a rallying cry. Tickets are going fast. Get yours now at donegetingscrewed.com. Stand up, speak out, be there.
You're listening to a Rebel News Podcast.
Tonight, why are we letting our high-trust society be destroyed? It's June 4th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
Hey, let me tell you about a pattern I've seen. Let me see if I can link these things together into a common thread. First, a blog entry by Dominic Cummings. He's a conservative political guru in the United Kingdom, famous for working with Boris Johnson. Here's what he wrote, and it immediately rang true to me. He was talking about a lot of things, including the daily invasion of the UK by fake refugees on little boats coming across from France over the English Channel, and how both the current Labour government and the previous Conservative government both said they wanted to stop the migrant boats, but both of them continued to agree to be bound by the European Convention on Human Rights. It's a left-wing European law as opposed to British law. It would be like a Canadian prime minister saying, I'd really like to close the Roxham Road border crossing, but the United Nations says I can't. It was a very interesting blog post, but it was this quote that grabbed me on a different but related subject, and I've just been thinking about it ever since. He says, if you talk to senior people in places like the United Arab Emirates, they tell you that big shots in that region now tell each other, don't send your kids to be educated in Britain. They'll come back radical Islamist nut jobs. That sounds like maybe he's joking, but I don't think he is at all. In the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there are synagogues even. There are Jews. And I'm talking with black hats and beards. They're very identifiable Orthodox Jews. I met a rabbi in the UAE who said he faces less abuse there than he does in New York City. They don't allow the radicalization in the UAE. Here's their foreign minister almost a decade ago.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
You might remember when we had a Rebel News fact-finding trip to Israel and then the UAE to check out the Abraham Accords. We went to Abu Dhabi and we saw where the government, the Muslim government, built a mosque, a church, and a synagogue right next to each other in an impressive facility. Imagine that. A Muslim country paying for and building a Jewish synagogue, and a Christian church, and they're actually used. There's even a Holocaust museum in the UAE. Compare that to the West. There are parts of London and New York, and I dare say parts of Mississauga and Scarborough, where if you simply dressed like an Orthodox Jew and walked through the streets, you'd be abused verbally and possibly physically too. I think for sure you would. Since I mentioned Dominic Cummings, let me read a bit more from his blog. He was once Boris Johnson's right-hand man, so there's some weight to his words. I'm just going to read a minute's worth. He said, "Our regime has spent 30 years, A, destroying border control and sane immigration, including the Home Office's jihad against the highest skilled, whom they truly loathe, discussing and try to repel with stupid fees, etc., and B, actively prioritizing people from the most barbaric places on earth, hence immigration from the tribal areas most responsible for the grooming and rape gangs keep rising, and C, funding the spread of those barbaric ideas and defending the organizations spreading them with human rights laws designed to stop the return of totalitarianism in Europe. In parallel, they've started propaganda operations with the old media to spread the meme that our real danger is the far right, code for white people. As Tories and Labour have continued their deranged trajectory, they have provoked exactly the reactions they most feared, including the spreading meme that our regime itself has become our enemy and the growing politicization of white English nationalism." That's quite an earful, but wow. I mean, it's almost like everything is accelerated in the UK if people like Dominic Cummings are talking this way. It's what Tommy Robinson has been talking about for a decade, by the way. Mass immigration, terrorism, political Islam that does not assimilate. It's one of the reasons they've tried to shut Tommy Robinson up, but now his ideas have spread. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. Nigel Farage is campaigning for a full immigration freeze. He's talking about large deportations. There is a renewed interest in the massive rape gangs that have been targeting white girls by primarily Pakistani Muslim men. Sorry, it's just a fact, but until recently, very few people would say it out loud.
There have been multiple cases now, and it's beyond any level of doubt that there's a disproportionate number of British Muslims involved in grooming gangs against underage white girls. And to say that is to report on the facts. It's not to be racist. And if we're backing away from this conversation, then all we're doing is leaving the ground far open. In what is a legitimate issue that requires addressing, we're leaving the ground for the populace to hijack that legitimate issue and make it their own for their own nefarious purposes.
That's Majid Nawaz, a British Pakistani journalist and critic. That's the only reason he could say it, because no one would accuse him of being anti-Pakistani and Muslim. He's both of those things. Anyways, many more people are talking about these things now in the UK, but boy, that country is so far gone. I really don't know if the place can be saved. I hope so. It might be too late, but polls show that Nigel Farage would win a majority government if the election were to happen today. Isn't that something about the United Arab Emirates, though? They think the Muslims of the UK are too anti-Semitic. I think Saudi Arabia has the same view. You know, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance once joked that the first Muslim nation with a nuclear bomb would be the UK. Of course, Pakistan already has one, but the joke still works. But look, enough about overseas. Look at Canada. Here's Dave Portnoy, the American journalist and sports enthusiast and entrepreneur. He's got Barstool Sports. One of his hobbies or business lines is to review pizzas. He reviews hundreds of pizzas. It's quite something. He always goes to the pizza shop in person, so it's fresh out of the oven. He's a pretty good reviewer, by the way. I think he's got good taste. And he's made an app that has a map of every pizza shop he's ever been to, with his score and with the public score and a video of his review. It's actually a really fun app, and it's a huge deal in the pizza world to be reviewed by Dave Portnoy. So he comes up to Toronto, and he'll hit 5 or 10 pizza places in a day. Bam, 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 one after the other, just to bank the videos. Because obviously it's, he does other things in life besides review pizza. So he was here in Toronto, about to do his thing. And remember, this guy is in the biggest, brashest, rudest cities in America all the time. He's from Philly, and I pick up from him that they swear a lot. He hangs out in New York, Chicago, New Jersey, People come up to him, people interrupt him, people ask him for his life. He offers people his life. Half the fun is watching people interact with Dave Portnoy and surprise him. But I've never seen this happen before, no matter where he's been. Take a look.
So he's calling this old school terraza. One bite, everybody knows the rules. We didn't get here the first time. Place is very cool on the inside. We got Frankie Lazzani's whole story, which almost seemed borderline not believable. Like, see, there we go. There we go. What are you guys fucking laughing about? Terrible. Exactly. So here we go. One bite, everybody knows the rules. We won't let that get into, what is that Toronto hospitality there?
F the Jews. That's Toronto now. And the giggling from the young men around him because it's so funny, right? Portnoy keeps going, doing his thing, but not before remarking on Canadian hospitality. When did that start to happen? Well, it's been building for a while, but on October 7th, there was a starter pistol, and throughout the West, Islamic extremists and leftist fellow travelers, Antifa and the like, decided to see what they could get away with, what they could make the new normal. Now, in places like Calgary and Edmonton, actually, things were tamped down pretty quickly when the University of Calgary had an illegal, trespassing, anti-Semitic encampment on their university, put up largely by non-students. It was taken down by police the very next day. That's Calgary. But in Toronto and Montreal, the racist encampments lasted weeks or months. Weekly anti-Semitic marches. Attacks and harassment against Jewish shops, Jewish people, Jewish homes. Constant denunciations of Jews, first on the streets and in the universities, now in other institutions. It's normal now, normalized completely. And nobody who is in charge, no one who's a leader, does anything about it. Not the mayor, not the police chief, not the premier, not the prime minister, not much of the media. Everyone who's supposed to say something says nothing. Are you surprised that the establishment is letting you down again? I'm not surprised at them. Look at this from Union Station. That's the biggest train station in Toronto. Take a look. Just taking over the place. Just having a little political rally right there in the subway in rush hour. They take over the streets, city blocks. There's 100 mosques in the Toronto area, but they'll just shut down a city street to pray. They took over the Jewish March a couple of weeks ago, and police acted as their bodyguards. 56,000 Jews marched, 100 Hamas protesters. If it was left to Mother Nature, the Hamas side would have been, shall we say, shepherded away pretty quickly. But the police protected them because that's normal now. What does that have to do with Dave Portnoy? What does it have to do with any of the things I've been talking about? Well, we used to be a high-trust society in Canada. We used to have an understanding of what it meant to be Canadian. And in the past 18 months, the Hamas side has moved the Overton window so much. What if someone had shouted out the N-word at Dave Portnoy instead of the J word? It would have been shocking. I'm not sure if those young men in the background would have been giggling because there is still a social shame, a stigma attached to such racism. It just isn't acceptable in public. Maybe you whisper it to your friends, but no one would say it in public. It's not a matter of the law. It's actually not unlawful to say the N-word or F the Jews. It's not illegal. But it's so socially unacceptable, no one would do it unless perhaps they were hiding their face. But to say F the Jews or even death to the Jews, it's happened so much without any meaningful social consequences that's what Canada is now. You don't see a lot of people saying that's not what Canada is because there's only so many times you can call it an anomaly before. No, that's not an anomaly. That's just how it is. I say it's about a low trust or a high trust society because a high trust society counts on each of us to have a common bond with each other, to be self-governing because we respect and know each other. We're part of a large family, shall we say. We don't need the state to intervene. We're friends. We're extended friends. We're like a clan, really. In a high trust society, people don't go to the food bank to do their grocery shopping. We all acknowledge it's for the truly needy. We control ourselves. In a low trust society, like Canada has become, international students here think we're suckers who gives away free food. So they go and just take the free food instead of grocery shopping. In a high trust society, people are respectful of women. In a low trust society, including most of the Muslim world, women are covered from head to toe. They're hidden. They're not allowed out of their guardian's sight, lest they be harassed or even raped. We're heading in that direction. In a high trust society, we agree to a common set of values that are enforced through the social lubricant of politeness and culture and expectations, not through police batons. We agree not to shout at blacks or Jews, just because at best that's rude. At worst, it judges people by race or religion instead of by the content of their character. It's a herd mentality. It's not being part of an open society. It's not what our grandparents fought for. That's part of high trust. It's a pact we have with the past, too. What would our grandparents say? But what if you just got here off a plane 10 minutes ago and your grandparents are from the most bigoted parts of the world? You don't care about Canada's history. No one even told you about Canada's history. You can't learn anything about Canada's history other than apparently we're genociders. That's what Trudeau said. And a lot of Canadians don't seem to care. I see the news that 817,000 migrants were allowed into Canada in the first quarter of the year. That's unsupportable. That's unsustainable, to use a word of the left. And many of those people are not racist. They're not criminals. They're just here because this is where all the goodies are. Can you blame them? And we let them come in. Those are just 817,000 legal migrants. But it's impossible not to notice that a disproportionate number of newcomers are malevolent. They are not a fit for the country. There's no attempt to assimilate them. They revert to out-group conduct. Check out this crime from Toronto revealed just today. This doesn't look like Canada looks to you. This looks like a foreign place. Yeah, we live in a new country now. Look, I don't know. I've mixed in a few things here. Canada's getting more dangerous. Canada is getting more radical. Canadian norms are being undone. The cultural bonds that unite us are being frayed. Look at this, a dance from the York Regional Police. I checked, and pretty much every single crime, no matter how you measure, property crime, violent crime in York Region is at a record level, and it's like double what it was a few years ago. But they're having their LGBTQ2QSL plus event, and that's really what counts. Migration is happening at an unsustainable, unassimilable rate. You'll be able to avoid the problem for a while if you avoid certain places, but those certain places are growing. Your little islands of what Canada used to be is getting smaller, and the monsters are walking everywhere in the country now. How did it come to be that way, that the UAE warns its parents not to send their children to the West for fear of becoming radical? And how did it come to be that way so quickly? I don't know, maybe this is a disjointed commentary, but it's what Canada looks like to me today. Stay with us for more. Well, about 15 years ago, I'm pleased to have invented the words ethical oil. In fact, I think I might have even trademarked them. I'll have to check it. And the left hated that because they said oil cannot be ethical. It's a contradiction in terms. While the joke was on them, of course oil can be ethical. In fact, the more ethically you produce it, the more you should buy oil from places like Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, as opposed to conflict oil from places like OPEC and Russia. They hated it because it made sense to people immediately. Well, I wrote a book by that name and I had a lot of fun fighting the bad guys. So imagine my surprise the other day when my new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, invented a phrase of his own, And I'm not sure if he's going to trademark it or, write a book about it, but I'd like to learn more. I've never heard of decarbonized oil. Have you? Here, take a look at my prime minister teaching me something.
Now, within the broader context of national interest, the interest is in, as mentioned in the press release, decarbonized barrels. So working alongside forms of decarbonization for those barrels. That is absolutely in our interest. It provides diversification of trade partners. It provides the development of new industries. It provides economic activity across the West and into the North. So yes, there's real potential there. We took up a good deal of our time in discussions and potential to move forward on that. And if further developed, the federal government will look to advance it.
Guys, I got to tell you, the chemical formula for oil involves carbon. It won't surprise you. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, pretty much the building blocks of life. You cannot take the carbon out of oil. It won't be oil then. I mean, I suppose you could think he means there's some sort of less emissions approach to producing it. But I don't know. When he kept talking about decarbonized oil again and again, I don't think I've ever heard that phrase. Joining me now is someone who's much smarter than me on these subjects. Maybe he's heard of it. His name is Mark Morano. He's the boss of ClimateDepot.com. Mark, great to see you again. What do you think about Canada and our new decarbonized oil? I've got two minds on it, but I'd like your view first.
Well, I can honestly say, and I've been at this since the early 90s, I have not heard the phrase decarbonized oil before. I haven't heard of decarbonized gas, decarbonized coal. It's a new one on me. As you know, it's all carbon based. So I don't know how you would actually remove the carbon. As even a climate activist scientist told Prime Minister Carney, this is basic physics. You can't, in chemistry, there's no such thing as decarbonized oil. Now, I think you should take a bow because this is Prime Minister Carney's way of saying ethical oil without actually saying ethical oil. That's his intent anyway. He's trying to say that we can make this work here in Canada and that this is, it's actually good because we have high standards. But he is the real sinister angle of the whole story. And if you have to read this in the news articles and a little deeper dive into what he's up to, he's referring to carbon capture, which is essentially a scam, where you capture carbon dioxide, bury it in the ground. It's a way here in the United States, in particular, for Republican politicians to pay off their donors. Democrat donors typically get paid off with solar and wind mandates and subsidies that way. Republican donors both get the subsidies, but like these carbon capture. So what I think Prime Minister Carney, if I can translate, in addition to him trying to say something close to ethical oil, he's basically saying, we're going to offset the emissions of this by doing a kangaroo charade of burying carbon dioxide in the ground, and we're going to pay lots of contractors and companies lots of taxpayer money, and we're going to do some accounting tricks, and hey, we're going to be able to show that the emissions have been offset, hence the phrase decarbonized oil.
Yeah, I think you're right. When I first heard it, I thought he was basically saying there will be no oil that's exported because there's no such thing. But, I just can't get over the word. It's like dehydrated water. I've got this amazing idea for dehydrated water, Mark. But I think you're right. And I think maybe I was just so startled by the phrase because I was looking at this. Let me read to you a headline in the biggest newspaper in Canada called the Toronto Star. It's also famously environmentalist. They actually take cash from U.S. lobby groups like the Tides Foundation to run climate stories. So they don't even pretend. And their headline is, Government Advisor Slams Mark Carney for Promoting Decarbonized Oil Pipelines. And it's from within his own party.
Yes.
I mean, they have so many climate scientists on their staff. And you're so right. They're saying, let me just read just a little bit of this, and then I'll throw it to you for your feedback. The co-chair of the federal government's Climate Action Advisory Group is slamming Prime Minister Mark Carney for using fossil fuel marketing speak at Monday's summit with provincial leaders when he endorsed the idea of building new pipelines for decarbonized oil. Simon Donner, a climate scientist at the University of British Columbia who co-chairs the Liberal government's net zero advisory body, alleged the term is misleading because it falsely suggests there's a way to burn fossil fuels without creating greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. There is no such thing as decarbonized oil and gas. Oil contains carbon. It is high school chemistry. You know what? I was getting my dander up because I thought this guy's trying to pull a fast one. Maybe, Mark, maybe he's trying to slide it through his own people. I am willing to say there is a 10% chance that Mark Carney will let the oil flow if he can just call it decarbonized oil. And if that's what we have to do to go along with it, I'm ready.
I agree with you. I mean, you guys are in such a no-win situation. I hate to say it, particularly on energy and climate policy, so to speak. You know, if the one negative thing, the very negative thing that Donald Trump, anything he did to contribute to the Canadian nationalism, which elected Mark Carney, that was all on Donald Trump, at least for his part of it, for wanting you to be the 51st state and creating that wave of nationalism that Carney rode in on, if that version of politics is true. You know, I don't know, you might disagree with that, but that's the conventional view that we hear here in the United States. And I think what Carney's doing, keep in mind, he was the head of the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, and he is a man steeped in ESG, steeped in climate financing. Yeah. He knows all about how carbon capture works. He knows all about how to sell things. As I said before, Justin Trudeau was the puppet. He's the puppet. Carney is the puppet master. So he understands all this. And this might be exactly what you're saying. He's signaling to his side, if you will, that we need this oil, because in order for him to maintain a governing coalition in Canada and start recovering your economy, you've got to open up oil. You've got to allow drilling. You've got to have more energy. And if he's got to do it through twisting basic chemistry, then by golly, that's what he'll do. And believe me, these scientists that are speaking out, the climate activists, they're going to be quiet if they think it's for the greater good of the Carney administration. He's a man of great strategic thinking, and I think that phrase, decarbonized oil, is part of his thinking on that. And by the way, you deserve full credit because you were about a decade and a half ahead with the ethical. I remember when I first heard you talking about that. I believe it was probably around 2014, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even a couple years earlier. But that was a huge phrase because the whole idea of the ethical oil, and then your work was actually validated by another Canadian report about basically going after carbon CO2 emissions or carbon dioxide emissions in the Western nations, increases carbon dioxide, period. Because all it does is offshore the energy to places with low environmental standards and low technological advancement. And that's exactly what's happened. We've seen CO2 continue to rise as countries like Canada, the US, and Europe have crunched down and severely restricted their energy. So you were way ahead of your time. Mark Carney is borrowing a page from you in marketing. He's unfortunately twisting science and his version, but I think he's sort of forced to do this. And I think there is a strategic political move on Canadians' part to go along with this bastardization of science if it means you can actually get some of this decarbonized oil.
Isn't that interesting? You know, when you were coming on the show and I was doing some research, I thought decarbonized oil, it's a trick against oil and gas people. But no, I think it's a trick against his own base, which shows just how much of a chameleon, how much of a political survivor, perhaps, Mark Carney is. I mean, it's not just that he was into green schemes. He was the head of GFANZ, Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Like, he spent that was his day job. That's what he did most of the time, evangelizing for big companies to divest from carbon-based fuels. So for him to flip around, I don't know if you know this, Mark, but the carbon tax was shaping up to be a really big campaign issue as recently as 6 months ago. But then Mark Carney simply said, guess what? I'm going to abolish it. Now, he didn't abolish it. He just reduced the rate.
He put it on hold, as far as I know. He can always bring it back, and that's dangerous, of course.
But still, for him, that was the centerpiece policy, not just for the Liberal Party, but for the entire media establishment. Here's the crazy thing, Mark. For election after election, the media party would ask the Conservative Party leader, what's your climate plan? What's your plan for net zero? What's your plan for the Paris Accords? Do you take this seriously, or do you want us all to burn? And it was such an emotional issue for them. But as soon as Mark Carney signaled that scrapping the carbon tax was okay, there was no one saying, hey, you're a hypocrite, or were you wrong, or have you rethunk it? Everyone knew what it was. It was just, we just got to trick the voters, just go along with this, and let's all pretend that we didn't for decades say this was an essential moral test that everyone must pass. That's why I think you might be right when we might start seeing liberals talking about decarbonized oil just because the boss says so and they're loyal to the boss.
That's exactly the way it works. And you're absolutely, I mean, in the United States, we could never have had in 1973, Nixon's trip to China. That could never have been done by a Democrat.
Right.
There are certain people who could only get away with certain things. Right. And I just can't emphasize enough. Mark Carney is a mastermind strategist. He is extremely competent. So he knows how to get a governing coalition together. You're going to win some and lose some on this battle in Canada. You're going to win on this one because I think he knows you need more domestic energy.
Wouldn't that be strange karma that the guy who spent decades attacking oil might be the guy to get the pipelines built? Now, I'm a skeptic. I am a 90% skeptic, Mark.
Well, it's just like Richard Nixon spent decades as the anti-communist making the normalization with communism. So what the sad part is that your entire government is still going along with the climate scam.
Yeah.
In that same article, you're less than 1.5% of Canada is of the global emissions is Canada responsible for. Less than 1.5%. So anything you guys do, and you still have these goals of 45% reduction by 2030 or 2035 in Canada. It'd be nice to have politicians on both sides of the aisle in Canada just completely make fun of that. At least in the United States, we do have Donald Trump, and they're using words like cult, religion, scam when they talk about it. And I think, and that's got to spread. It is spreading. Yeah, German elections recently, the skeptic essentially won. Argentina pulled out of the UN climate summit when they talked to Donald Trump. France didn't send their delegation, all throughout the EU. So I just feel bad for Canada, but I think even though the evil one won, let's put it that way, Mark Carney, the WEF, I don't want to say protege. Again, he's one of the headmasters. Even though he won, I think he's going to be forced to do things that'll be good for Canada and that'll make the conservatives in Canada smile, because he's just absolutely going to be forced to. And we might laugh at the way he goes about it, like decarbonized oil.
Wow. Hey, let me throw one more thing at you. I follow UK politics. I'm just really interested in it because we have a toe in Canada is a little bit American and a little bit British, I think. We're probably 2/3 American and 1/3 British. I love going over there to see what's happening because I think it's a premonition of things that could come here to North America. And their insurgent party called Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, who used to be the head of UKIP, he has come right out against net zero, which is something that both the Labour government and the predecessor Conservatives, I don't know why Boris Johnson, the so-called Conservative, was so obsessed with net zero, and same with Rishi Sunak. But Nigel Farage, who if there was an election held today, he would be PM. He is as dismissive of net zero as you are, Mark. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's huge news. And this is, again, happening in different parts. I think a lot of it was led with the farmers' rebellion and the rise of the farmers against net zero in the Netherlands and throughout the EU, throwing the manure at the EU headquarters in Brussels. And we're seeing that across the board. They have these meetings from Poland to Hungary, the former Czech Republic. All of these countries are now getting bolder and bolder. But you're right, it's a huge sea change in England. They've needed this for decades. Remember, Boris Johnson's transport minister actually said that owning a car was outdated 20th century thinking. They were trying to end that. Boris Johnson, as the UK prime minister, wanted to actually dynamite or cement over the fracking wells as a homage to how serious they were to the net zero cult. And Rishi Sunak was a joke as well. So, this hopefully will be a sea change. You now have a legitimate party. When I say legitimate, someone who's actually standing up and not paying lip service to the agenda of the World Economic Forum or the United Nations. And Nigel Farage is set, hopefully, to be the future prime minister. We even see places like France where Macron's in trouble. I call it the Trump effect. Once you stand up and start telling it like it is, and the other politicians see the response of the public and the world, then they get the courage to do it as well. It took a long time for us all to oppose the COVID lockdowns and the mandates. But once we did, that was where a lot of this has born out of, that it's just sort of, you become red pilled. And I think England has become, at least the Reform Party is red pilling the conservatives in England. And I think the same thing's happening throughout Europe. And we saw it in Argentina, and we're seeing it in other countries as well. But the United States is where we're seeing it at ground zero. It's amazing what's happening. Even like, just as an example, Donald Trump has a war against the EV mandates. The new polling out from the Automobile Association shows that the desire and any public interest in buying an EV has dropped to record lows. They haven't even measured it, down almost to single digits. That's what happens when you have a government that's not just, forcing you to buy something and banning the competition. It's amazing things to watch. It just takes the political courage to tell it like it is. And if nothing else, Donald Trump will be remembered for that legacy historically. And I think go down as one of the greatest presidents just for that reason. He's a narrative buster. And that is one of the most important bully pulpit functions of any leader, prime minister, president, or head of a nation.
Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Mark, great to catch up with you. I think you've changed my mind on this decarbonized oil. It's like de-alcoholized beer, I think.
Yeah. It's the old church indulgence. You can do the sin, but if you do the indulgence, the sin is now it's a guilt-free sin, or whatever you want to call it. It's a sin-free sin.
Right on. All right. You take care, my friend. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Ezra. I appreciate it.
There it is. He's the boss of climatedepot.com. Stay with us. More ahead. Well, it's good to be back in our headquarters here in Toronto. I was in Regina, Saskatchewan the other day. It's very interesting. Saskatchewan, wonderful place, about the friendliest people. There's still a high trust society in the main, but even that place is changing. 500 people came out to a town hall to talk about independence. That's quite something to me. And I said to them, look, Alberta is going to go first. It is a fact. Alberta will have a referendum on sovereignty next year. And Saskatchewan is right there. And Saskatchewan and Alberta are so closely aligned. They were twins. They were both admitted to Confederation on the same day, September 1st, 1905. They were actually supposed to join as one big province called Buffalo. So it's like they're twins. And I think they're going to have a front row seat to that referendum. The whole country, by the way, I'm sure will be riveted by it. But if Alberta does go, how much longer till Saskatchewan joins them? Or if Alberta uses the referendum as a kind of or else when talking to Mark Carney, maybe that's something Saskatchewan might do too. I don't know. It would be tough to look at Alberta having that democratic right and not give it to Saskatchewan people too. Very interesting. I enjoyed my brief visit to Regina. And by the way, if you're interested in these discussions, we're having an amazing debate in Red Deer on June 14th, and you're invited. We're going to have a whole day-long thing. And I know this is probably not of such interest to people in Eastern Canada, but if you're in Alberta or even Saskatchewan, BC, come on by in Red Deer. You can find out more info at donegettingscrewed.com. And there's a keynote debate, the whole day-long activities, but the keynote debate is between Keith Wilson, the lawyer for the trucker convoy, who is a pro-sovereigntist, and David Legg, former senior advisor to the government of Alberta, who's saying, no, let's fix Canada from within. That's going to be an amazing debate. That's Saturday, June 14th. And if you're in Alberta, I hope to see you there. Tickets are selling fast. We got so many great people signed up. We're going to have a media panel with people from Juno News and Western Standard and Rebel News. So all your favorite alternative journalists will be there. We'll have some different political parties, some of whom want to separate, some of whom don't. It's going to be a great day. It's sort of like going to be one of our Rebel News live events. And yeah, I'm sort of excited about it. And I have a couple of surprise stories that we're going to show you over the weekend. And I'm not going to give them away until were actually on the scene. But lots cooking here at Rebel News. I hope you're enjoying the work of our many journalists. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.